What's happening, folks? Back with another reaction, back with some more Chuck Berry. And we're returning for one of his all-time classic hits, which is to say a number of his tunes I think are quite famous and have become staples of that early rock and roll era. But this one is self-referential in that regard, and I do think it's one that has been used in a number of films and documentaries over the year, which is to say rock and roll music. This is one I heard very early on. I think maybe the only one I was familiar with before this in my own history of hearing his music when I was growing up was Maybelline. But yes, this one refers to rock and roll music, is ultimately the type of music that he wants to hear and which has that sound that was sort of cutting edge at the time, even though of course it was based on forms which had existed prior to that. But it was part of the emerging sound that we now regard as classic, like vintage rock and roll. And again, it's 1957, so it's certainly early when it comes to hits within the genre as so defined. But yes, I love Barry's voice on this one. It's just the kind of tune that makes you want to dance, which is funny because, normally for someone of the late 20th and early 21st century, when you think of rock music, I don't know if dancing is the first thing that comes to mind, but certainly in that throwback vintage era where it was emerging, it was seen as a type of music that young people danced to, and dancing in a way that was considered controversial or certainly non-traditional. So, these days you think of techno or you think of pop music with a steady 4/4 beat as being the most danceable, but as I said, rock and roll, from what I understand, back in the 50s was considered a licentious and, let's say, on the edge of what was acceptable form of music, in particular because of the way that young people would dance to it. So let's give it a listen. This is Chuck Berry. The track is Rock and Roll Music, and it's from 1957, though it's included here on the, what is it called? The Best of Chuck Berry, which is obviously a compilation of his singles.
Just let me hear some of that rock and roll music. Any old way you choose it. It's got a backbeat, you can't lose it. Any old time you use it. It's gotta be rock and roll music. If you wanna dance with me. If you wanna dance with me. I have no kick against modern girls, unless they try to play it too darn fast and change the beauty of the melody until it sounds just like a symphony. That's why I go for that rock and roll music. Any old way you choose it. It's got a backbeat, you can't lose it. Any old time you use it. It's gotta be rock and roll music. If you wanna dance with me. If you wanna dance with me. I took my loved one over across the tracks so she could hear my man a wailing sax. I must admit they have a rockin' band. Man, they were blowing like a hurricane. That's why I go for that rock and roll music. Any old way you choose it. It's got a backbeat, you can't lose it. Any old time you use it. It's gotta be rock and roll music. If you wanna dance with me, if you wanna dance with me. Way down south they gave a jubilee. The Dutchy folks they had a jamboree. They're drinking home from a wooden cup. The folks dancing got all shook up and started playing that rock and roll music. Any old way you choose it. It's got a backbeat, you can't lose it. Any old time you use it. It's gotta be rock and roll music. If you wanna dance with me. If you wanna dance with me. Don't care to hear 'em play a tango. I'm in the mood to dig a mambo. It's way too early for a Congo. So keep a rocking that piano so I can hear some of that rock and roll music. Any old way you choose it. It's got a backbeat, you can't lose it. Any old time you use it. It's gotta be rock and roll music. If you wanna dance with me. If you wanna dance with me.
Legend. It's like everything about his tunes. They're fun, they're funny, they often have comedic lines or pronunciations. Indeed, hurricane and that piano to rhyme with mambo and Congo. Like, I love sort of in the moment feel of a lot of his performances. And of course, when I already reacted to his My Ding-a-Ling, which is perhaps the most comedic of his songs, it's definitely, it just feels like he's being a bit of a showman while he's, singing the song. And yeah, I was thinking as I listened to this that there's one or two lines you could maybe interpret as not only being self-aware and talking about the very phenomenon that the song expresses, but there's a bit of like socioeconomic, like taking my girl across the tracks, which, train tracks in a given city are often depicted as like the poorer side of the city and the more affluent side of the city, the more like suburban part of the city. And so going across the tracks is seen as, slumming it up in a cultural context that is outside of where you come from. So taking the girl across the tracks so that she can hear that wailing sax. I don't know if it was wailing, but that also made me think that a lot of this early rock and roll, which again, it's interesting, I think of artists like Little Richard, and this is certainly the case with his music, where it's not just defined by the guitar, which is perhaps the instrument most associated with rock and roll, but it's piano, it's saxophone. Those two instruments in particular were very much in the milieu of the early rock and roll style. So I love that both instruments are referenced over the course of the song. And yeah, it's just a fun, danceable tune. And again, talking about like, look, this is what I'm into, this is what I want to hear, this is what I'm taking my girl to hear. So if you want to dance with me, it's got to be that rock and roll music. This is what's hot, this is what we're doing. So I like the self-awareness of the song, I like the cheekiness of the song, I like the clever use of bent pronunciation for a couple of the rhymes. So it's just great. It's vintage Chuck Berry, it's classic. So again, I've gone through a handful of tunes on here. I think I went through Maybelline. I don't know if I did Roll Over Beethoven. That's another one that's very, popular even in later generations and has been used in movies and TV shows as well. So I'll have to look at my YouTube studio. If I haven't reacted to it, that's the one that I'll do next. So let me know what you think of this one. I will see you next time. Peace.